As the Paladin and Drider were locked in pitched combat, they both knew that they were far too close in skill level. Only one of them would be coming out of this alive. But which one?
Hey guys, fun intros aside, I just want to say thank you guys so much for all the support, and I'm really grateful that so many more of you are commenting nowadays. It's really fun to kind of interact with you guys and see what you all think of various projects and changes that I could make to models for both next time and the current model. There have been a few that have had some minor changes to them already, and I've already noticed a huge increase in my overall quality, and I appreciate you guys being there to not only support my hobby, but also helping to push me to that next level. In any case, today we're going to be talking about Driders, one of my all-time favorite models. But enough of me talking right now, let's get on with the video. So I wanted to take a hot minute to just talk about my favorite monster, Driders. Now, I enjoy using Driders as like a right-hand man to your big bad if your campaign is going to lead up to that. And the reason for that is it's got a challenge rating 6, which means it's not an impossible fight to do early on, especially if you have 4 to 5 players. But it can also be a really great reoccurring bad guy, and when you start combining it with some of the other things that Drow can have, like other class types and archetypes, and you combine that in with your Drider stats, they get to be really powerful and could be the campaign villain all on their own. But enough of that aside, let's move on. So I'm starting out with this color change paint by Turbo Dork. It's basically a metallic purple. It plays well off of the other colors in the line, but when you use it by itself, it tends to make this nice solid coat. Now I wanted to have this metallic sheen. I wanted her to feel as though she was armored to the nines as opposed to armed to the nines. One of the cool things about Driders is that you can give them a pretty big armor class and make them this real big tough tank for the party to fight, and I wanted them to feel that way. I knew that I wanted my color scheme to be along the lines of purple and red when I started, and although in the end this purple sheen isn't perfect, meaning it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted, it's definitely still visible and it was worth doing. Sometimes when I do these little experiments you can't see them at the end, but in this case it worked out in my advantage. Now I forgot to do the first pass and record it, so on my second pass here I'm doing Shyish purple, and that's giving us this almost black obsidian color while still allowing that purple metallic to show through. I really like the way that it turned out, and then we're immediately going to be moving into brighter shades of purple. Now I ended up spraying this purple from a very specific direction when it came to the carapace. However, I wanted this to be my base tone for all of the skin, so I just evenly applied that across the board. Now specifically here I was using Gene Stealer purple. You could use pretty much almost any kind of a bright color purple that you want to use here, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stay away from those deepest recesses. I'm hitting the overall shape of the panel, so each one of these little scale shapes, if we were to break it down into quarters, I'm covering about 3/4 worth of each one of those scales. I'm applying very thin coats of paint, trying to do my best to keep it translucent so that all my previous work still shows through, and then I'm going in and I'm reinforcing this purple tone in all of the joints on the legs and just doing my best to kind of set that up for all of our edge highlight work that's going to come next. Here I'm just using a little bit of Bugman's Glow to add a bit of a flesh tone to the bottom of the model, as I feel it's important to show that this miniature, and by proxy the monster itself, is not armored all over. There are some softer bits and places where your players can strike, and I want to make sure that there is that visual knowledge there for your players to see and to understand that it's not just armor everywhere. So I've had a lot of people ask me about my airbrush and what kind of an airbrush that I use. Now I use a Badger 100, that is just the one that this happens to be. I also have a Talon and some Pache stuff. I like airbrushes, I like to collect airbrushes. I don't currently have an Iwata, but I like a lot of their accessories. Try to stick to name brands if you're going to choose to get one, and you can actually get a lot done with a pretty cheap airbrush. Now mine is a double action, and I recommend that if you can afford a double action you get one, because you'll get more utility out of it versus a single action, which you're going to only really be able to use for base coating. However, all that said and aside, a lot of what I use my airbrush for is to save time. A lot of what you can do with an airbrush, you can also do with your regular brush, whether it's through dry brushing, glazing, whatever. You can do it all that way. In the case of today's model, a lot of the airbrushing that I'm doing at the start is to save time on base tones, as well as what we just did was to save time on glazing. It's so that I don't have to make a glaze and then apply multiple layers while waiting for that to dry. I can do a very thin coat of paint using my airbrush and save a bunch of time. So all I've done here is I'm going in and on all of the joints I've added a purple dry brush. I've also kind of added a little bit extending away from that. That's kind of to help blend out the colors for when we go to do more extreme edge highlighting. And now I'm putting on my first coat of red onto the legs to kind of give it a bit more color. I didn't want all of this to be a solid purple. Now I end up focusing the color in a couple of places, and then I go back in later on and kind of blend it out throughout the legs, as well as you can see here in the undercarriage region to kind of give it more of a fleshy look. Now, all of that said and aside, there's a reason I do my red in a very specific way, and that is because I am red-green colorblind, red being one of the harder colors for me to see, or at least to see properly, as well as to see the different tonations within the color red. So I try to do my reds in a very specific way so that if I have to make a change or I have to modify or fix something, I know my process and I know how to fix the problem. Whereas for a lot of people, they could probably just look at it and figure it out. I actually have to have a formula for how I do my reds. Unfortunately, my footage got corrupted, and this was the only footage I was able to save of me adding the edge highlight. Now what I did is I went in and I put a little dot around all of the raised surfaces on the legs, and then I also went around and I edge highlighted all the carapace pieces, as you can see, as well as I edge highlighted the tips of the legs as they kind of come to a tapered point. And although it looks really messy now, I clean it up a bit. This model was so fiddly to try to handle because it's not got a good way to attach to the base while still painting everything, and I just kept rubbing stuff off with my hands. It was so frustrating, but we made it work in the end. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the base, as I like to do my own videos for bases, base design, etc, etc. So I'm not going to be doing too much about the base. Just know that what I could paint in contrast paints was painted in contrast paints, and then the crystal and the fungus was painted using regular traditional paints. To get the wording on the scroll that you'll see toward the end, I was actually able to use a Prismacolor fine tip 500mm tipped pen, and that is actually sharp enough to do writing at the proper scale I feel for D&D. I don't really write any words, I just kind of do squiggly lines, and it works out just fine. So in the future, for any kind of clips where I'm showing the base work, just understand that the reason we're going to go through in high speed and not really talk about it is I like to do basing in my own videos. If you'd like to see how I do bases like this, there are other videos on the channel, but if you've got any ideas for bases that you'd like to see me attempt, leave them in the comments and I will do my best to make another video about that. Emperor's Children Pink is a really wonderful color when used as a glaze to imitate a fleshy tone. So I'm going back in on everything that I want to look fleshy, and I'm using edge highlighting and glazing to kind of all over the surface of that. And I'm trying to stay out of the deepest recesses, and I'm just going in and adding this pink tone. Now, this color dries semi-translucent, so it's really easy to see what you're doing when you're working with it while it's wet. And then as it dries, it kind of dries semi-translucent, and you know where to go back in and add in a few extra layers, or just leave well enough alone. I kind of tend to, with flesh things like this, especially on monsters, anywhere where the bulk of the meat is, for as nasty as it is to say that, that's where I try to highlight the most and put the most pink. So here I'm just adding a bit of Demon Hide to some Gene Stealer purple, but you could add Bugman's Glow to purple and honestly get pretty close to the combination of colors that I'm achieving to do my skin tones. I wasn't super happy with the Gene Stealer on its own, and the Demon Hide is a little bit of a brighter color. Now unfortunately, Demon Hide doesn't really exist as a color anymore that you can purchase. There are similar colors, but it's not quite the same. So if you want to remake that old school classic color as you don't have anymore, add a little bit of Bugman's to it and get it closer to that skin tone. You may need to add a little bit of white, but honestly I didn't need to add that much to replicate the color, and I think it looks pretty great. Next I wanted to go ahead and knock my metallics out of the way, so we're going to be using Vallejo metal color silver straight out of the pot. We're not doing anything to this. We're applying this to all of the armor, including the armor on the arms themselves. We're applying this to the blades as well. We're not going to be doing any kind of fancy shading or adding any kind of washes to this. As in the monster manual, it is quite a bright color. There's very little shading on it, and I wanted to leave it as close to the monster manual as I could, as I am taking the monster manual as inspiration, as well as some other art that I found on Pinterest. So we're going to leave this nice and bright. We're not going to add any washes, and we're going to do the same thing with the gold on the handles. But for the gold, I ended up using Citadel's gold color, which is Retributor armor. It's one of my favorite go-to colors for gold, but you can use whatever gold works for you. Now I was wanting to take a lot more inspiration from the monster manual, so I went ahead and I painted the hair white. Now as I was painting it white, I realized there were some pretty horrible seam lines going on, and it's really unfortunate, the placement, as well as the fact that for some reason the plastic that they use for WizKids is a little bit on the soft side. It's kind of similar to Reaper Bones, where it's not really knife friendly, so cleaning up mold lines could be an absolute pain, especially on the legs. There's a lot of flat spots on the legs that you guys can't see from where I was trying to remove mold lines that I just couldn't live with. And it's unfortunate that I didn't see this before I started painting, but honestly I probably would have left it because of how bad it is. If I could change anything about this model, I would want them to go ahead and cast the head separately so that that seam line could run down the length of the hair and be a lot easier to remove. And there you have it, guys. I really love the way this turned out. If I could change anything, I might change the joints to be more of a pinky red color. And honestly, that's probably the only change that I would really make to the color scheme, as I wanted it to stay pretty true to how it looks in the monster manual. I've got a couple more of these that are in different designs from different companies that I definitely want to paint up, as well as some ones that I want to 3D print. I've got a pretty cool idea for a campaign using the 7 Deadly Sins, where I actually want all of the sins to be a different Drider, and I think it would be a lot of fun. The model that I'm showcasing here with the Drider is actually from one of our previous videos, so go ahead and go check that out. I'll put something here, or I'll put it at the end so that you guys could go easily find it. Real quick before we get going, guys, I tried something different with my lighting here. It didn't quite work. It kind of blew out the colors a little bit. We'll work on that for next time. But in the meantime, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button because it really does help, and consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already so that you know when I make more stuff like this. Those of you who have been following the channel for a while and have been following me since TikTok know that I really like to take input from you guys and make my videos based on that. So if you guys have any ideas for future videos or tutorials or things that you want to learn, go ahead and post those in the comments below, even if you're not sure how I can turn it into a video. And if I can think of a way, I'll do it, and I'll get that going for you guys as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support as always, and until next time, I hope your display case is always filled and your pile of shame never runs empty. Until next time.